Hello, hello. This is the my artifact episode number 3713. 13 is it 12? I'm not really sure about is it artifact episode number 13 or 12. Today's date is 20 November 2025. It's been almost like a night at 9:08 a.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right, the question is, what if every business idea was instantly funded? Oh, that is a really good question. All right, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. And when I try to think about that reality, I'm kind of like a utilizing my information and knowledge to kind of like a create that reality. And somehow it kind of like a felt really good because it's not a kind of like a some conventional way of giving the answer. You have to kind of like a some create the answer regarding about the question it says, and it kind of like a really required imagination and knowledge and experience, and somehow it felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It is just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I'm saying. It is raw, it is unfiltered, it is just my opinion. So do not so it's my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Sorry about these noises. It's kind of like something really fucking up a lot. I don't know. Like every time I kind of like something recording artifact in the morning, like this kind of like something chaos has actually happened in my surrounding. Yeah. By the way, this is the garbage truck. Have you ever kind of like listening this thing? By the way, in India, these are very common. Like basically, it's not actually common. Yeah. Like basically, almost like maybe 5 years since it started to kind of like collecting the garbage. Before that, there is no garbage truck. Okay. But still, there is a kind of like a lot of improvement is actually happened. So that is good. That is great. All right. Yeah. Okay. So what exactly is this question? Okay. So what if kind of like everyone gets funded? Every kind of like a marketing idea or any kind of like a business idea is actually funded very instantly. Then what would be the happen? What exactly is this thing? What kind of like a what exactly stuff is actually happen? Well, what I'm thinking is that what if like basically every idea or every kind of like a business thing is kind of like a funded very instantly, then there is no idea at all. What do you mean by that? Let me give you the context. Okay, yeah. I'm trying to explain as kind of like a simply as a YouTube point of perspective. Okay, yeah. As a kind of like a being a YouTuber and being a kind of like a successful entrepreneur or kind of like establish a kind of like a successful business, it's somewhat something same. But being a YouTuber is kind of like a little less difficult. Being a business person is little bit more difficult, but the path is somewhat something very much similar. I'm a bit more familiarized with the YouTube procedure, so I'm kind of like explain this thing. Okay, yeah. Now in the YouTube, like basically is this thing, the YouTube is kind of like a far more easier to start. Okay, yeah, no one has to tell you nothing like at all. You just have to start your account and you just have to upload your video. Okay, that's it. You just instantly become a YouTuber. Okay, yeah. But what's the actual difference between being a kind of like a something Mr. Beast and what's the kind of like a something being a kind of like I just started a YouTube account? What's kind of like a thing? Like basically is this thing, if I started a YouTube account, will I be become a kind of like a something Mr. Beast level of YouTuber in the next decade? Probably not. Why? Why is that thing? Because let me tell you one thing now. If like basically everyone can access a YouTube and everyone can kind of like create a YouTube any time that they when they want, then probably is this thing everyone can do this thing and probably it became chaotic, and there is no kind of like simply hold its unique value. Let me give you perspective regarding about the creating YouTube account or regarding about doing a business. These are both thing are kind of like a made for people. Okay, yeah, you are making video for people. Okay, because in the end the video should supposed to be watched by the people. You are kind of like a running a business. In the end that business is customer is actually based on the people. Okay, yeah. So you have to be cater your services to the people. Okay, yeah. So in that particular context, it's really essential to you to understand that the people. Okay, yeah. And what kind of like assembly you are kind of like a serving some sort of value or kind of like a some product or things like that, because you have to be a unique in itself. Regarding about YouTube, if you wanted to create any kind of like a content regarding about gaming, regarding about anything vlogging or whatever it is, it should supposed to be unique. Okay, yeah, because there is a lot of you who are kind of like a making content like you. There are a lot of gaming content creator, there are a lot of kind of like assembly vlogger, there are a lot of kind of like some people who are kind of like making various amount of content. You have to be unique about your content, USP. You have to be unique selling price. What is actually your unique selling price? You have to understand that thing, and you have to sell that thing. Because let me tell you one thing now, if everyone are kind of like doing the things that you are doing, then probably you will not gonna notice. It's essential that you should supposed to do something very different than normal. Then and only then you will consider as a uniqueness, and they'll be kind of consider getting your little bit traffic. Little people are kind of like watching at you. Okay, yeah, but this is also one part of the story. There is also multiple parts of the story. Another part is that, okay, let's just say that you are a dancer and you love dancing. Okay, yeah, but problem is that you wanted to create a content regarding about dance. Okay, yeah, you kind of like set up your mobile phone, kind of like started doing dancing. You don't really get that many views. No, you are getting somewhat something views, but you are not getting that many views. Okay, yeah. Now basically you realize that what if kind of like a somebody Photoshop graphic design would be a kind of like a somebody I would choose that thing, because this kind of like a somebody genre, very less people actually touch that thing, and I have kind of like a unique idea regarding about that. So what if I could kind of like start doing Photoshop graphic designing instead of kind of like a somebody dancing. Now basically is this thing, my core principle, my core thing that I wanted to execute my skill is dancing. Okay, yeah, but I kind of like a change my skill according to the kind of like a somebody the according to the kind of like a somebody the kind of like a somebody the trending and things and that, and I kind of like a chose to be a Photoshop design. Now, am I really good at Photoshop design? No, I'm not, because I'm dancer. I'm not kind of like a simply Photoshop designer. Yeah, I might gonna do little bit of Photoshop design, but probably it's not my thing. Yeah, I'm kind of like a doing this thing is because of kind of like a somebody YouTube is kind of like a somebody I seen a kind of like a somebody vacancy over there, so that's why I'm kind of like a putting over here. And that is not really good, because if you are trying to do something very different than you are not, then probably it's kind of like a creates a very cripple thing, because you are not able to kind of like a simply being a fun way to kind of like a create a content. Let me give you context. Let me give you being a YouTube is a kind of like a thing is that now you are alone. People will not gonna support you. You are always fragile. You are always broke. You will not have money and things and that, and you have to be kind of like a sustain this pressure for almost like a 2-3 year, and it really required a courage to do this thing, and you really required a courage to kind of like stick with your content and kind of like do the thing, because in the end you have to believe in that particular stuff. If you don't really believe in that, if you don't really believe that you you shouldn't supposed to do a dance that much or things like that, then probably it's not really that much. Even if how much talented you are, if you don't really believe in yourself, then probably you will not gonna sustain the YouTube. Okay, yeah. Same thing happened with the kind of like a business strategy too. Regarding about the business, you can do multiples of business. There are so many business that you could do. You have to believe that kind of like a what the process that you do, what kind of like business that you do, kind of like a somebody that matter to the people, and you have to believe in that thing. If you didn't really believe in that, then probably it became more and more chaos. Example, let's just say that Elon Musk is kind of like a decided to kind of like a somebody reusable rocket. Okay, before that, like a before almost like a maybe 2003, I'm not really sure, but early 2005. Okay, yeah, is this thing that reusable rocket is kind of like a somebody considered as a laughing thing, because every rocket is kind of like a somebody using it kind of like a destroy. Now why we can destroy the rocket is because of that when we use the rocket, it's not meant to be kind of like a somebody that you reuse again, because it's kind of like a somebody very hectic to do this thing. It's very difficult to do this thing. And another thing is that it's far more kind of like a somebody cheaper to destroy that particular rocket to kind of like a somebody reuse that rocket again. Okay, and at that time technology was not even exist. And so basically Elon Musk kind of like decided that I'm gonna utilize I'm gonna make kind of like a reusable rocket. I'm gonna make a reusable rocket. Now when he tried to do this thing at that time, Boeing and kind of like other kind of like some aircraft manufacturer company, they are kind of like laughing at them, because at that time there is no kind of like concept that reusable rocket was kind of like something exist. Now basically laughing at them or kind of like a things or kind of like a let him down is kind of like very much chaos. Let me give you context. Reusable rocket means kind of like assembly you have to make a rocket that kind of like assembly fly its own and kind of like a land by its own. Okay, yeah, like basically it should supposed to be happen automatically. Okay, yeah, now when you are trying to do this process, you are kind of like a failing multiple times. And also another thing is that now because of you are kind of like a try to achieve something that people are not really appreciate or accepting this thing, so you will not gonna get funding. So basically is this thing you are crippled from both side. You are crippled from kind of like a failure, and you also crippled from you are not getting funding and things like that. And still you are kind of like a sustaining, still you are kind of like a believe that nah, this would be a future, this would be a kind of like a things that I would supposed to be do and stuff like that. And when you still try to do this thing, then you kind of like a create the history. This is what kind of like a things happen. Now basically is this thing, most of people actually focus on the kind of like a only the success part, but most of people don't really think about that kind of like a middle part they are been through. They don't really believe that they what they are been through. Like basically is this thing, we actually kind of like simply understand that ki Mr. Beast doesn't really have any computer to make video and things like that, but right now he can afford kind of like millions of computer and things and that. Most of people believe in just kind of like only focus on success. Okay, like what kind of like a success that Mr. Beast have, but most of people don't really realize that what exactly Mr. Beast went through, what kind of like assembly that he passes through. Like basically being a YouTube, being a chose a YouTube career is kind of like assembly very much fucked up thing, dude. Okay, yeah, because society is not even accepting this thing. Like right now is this thing that ki I am in 2025, my parents are not believing being kind of like assembly YouTube and things like that, but still I'm kind of like assembly doing this thing, and it's really hard, dude, really hard. Because let me tell you one thing now, let me give you the perspective. Okay, let me give you context. Okay, yeah, is this thing that ki if my father is actually having a dinner and if I also kind of like somebody dinner, so basically is this thing, if we are both are kind of like somebody doing doing a dinner at the same room. Okay, yeah, and there is no TV on, there is nothing really on, nothing really at all. So basically I'm kind of like somebody being really awkward to kind of like sit in front of them. Why? Because I consider myself kind of like being really failure. I'm 32, living with my parents, and kind of like somebody I quickly understand that what my parents, what my father actually think. He didn't really said me that ki what are you kind of like doing with your life and things and that, but probably I realized that what he was thinking. Okay, yeah, and basically is this thing, this is kind of like some pain that I have to be kind of like some face. Because of that ki I'm kind of like somebody giving the pain to the kind of like one of the important person in my life, my parents. Okay, yeah, and I'm actually doing this thing is for the kind of like assembly, is for kind of like assembly that for my better future, for this thing. But till this particular process I just have to bear that pain and things like that. Okay, yeah, now this is very hard thing, dude, very hard thing, and most of people don't really focus on that. Most of people actually think that ki only focus on success part, but people don't really focus on kind of like some middle part that they went through and things like that. It's very much fucked up and things like that. Whatever, the question is actually question is actually about that ki what if kind of like assembly everyone has a kind of like a chance to kind of like establish a money, or kind of like assembly every business idea is kind of like getting fund and things like that, then what would be that particular thing? Now basically is this thing, if every business idea is actually funded by the money, then probably there is kind of like some chaos will gonna happen. First of all is that ki it's really essential to understand that ki which business should supposed to be grow. Okay, yeah, you shouldn't supposed to be kind of like somebody provide the fund to such a company that kind of like creates the weapon or creates a chaos in the society and things like that, because in the end they are not really meant to be good. Another thing is that some of the startup are not meant to be good, like some of the CEOs or some of the kind of like employees are not meant to be kind of like something kind of like somebody creating a business or things like that. Because it's like that now, be doing a business is kind of like somebody have a sense of business. Like basically it's really understand that what should you supposed to be sell. Okay, regarding about YouTube, regarding about the business as the same thing, you have to understand that what should you supposed to be sell. Okay, yeah, and this is one of the most really essential thing, because everyone are kind of like started doing startup, then probably you should supposed to do a startup. It's completely wrong thing, completely wrong thing. Okay, yeah, and end up having kind of like a failure even if you have so much amount of money and things like that. Okay, because money cannot solve the problem. Money is kind of money is does not. Okay, if you are kind of like only focus on because of that ki I kind of like started a company and I just need a startup and I need a funding and things and that you should supposed to focus on just funding, nothing really at all. Be focused on kind of like some excellence part. Be kind of like some focus on kind of like some make sure you are kind of like somebody better at something very different, better, and kind of like somebody, I don't know how do you supposed to explain, like being expert in this thing. Okay, yeah, then and only then people are kind of like somebody buy your stuff or kind of like get your service and things like that. Let me give you perspective. iPhone is a kind of like a only company who is like iPhone is not the phone, is kind of like something really much better. Let's just say recently there is iPhone 17 launch. Now in perspective, there is a kind of like a Vivo X300. Now Vivo X300 has a camera is really good, really great. It can take a kind of like a really good amount of photo, more than iPhone, more than Samsung and things like that. But still, most of people actually buy iPhone. Why? Why is that thing? Like basically is this thing Oppo X300 is kind of like a best in every factor, like basically performance and things and that in the like basically you will never gonna get any kind of like assembly minimum. And still Vivo X300 is kind of like a bit more cheaper than iPhone 2. Like basically iPhone 17 cost almost like a 1.5 lakh, and the Vivo is kind of like a cost almost like a 5 lakh, almost like a 1 lakh. It's been almost like a 50,000 you are kind of like a saving up when you buy Vivo. Okay, Vivo or any kind of like some other brand, but most of people actually buy Apple. Why is that thing? Okay, yeah, because Apple built the reputation. Apple built what kind of like something that he went through. Apple built kind of like a uniqueness in his whole value. Right now, Apple creates because of the effort that he did on the last couple of decades and things like that. That's why people are kind of like started believing that. Like if I'm gonna say Apple, we are actually starting imagining Steve Jobs, we are starting imagining a Tim Cook, we are kind of like imagining as a kind of like assembly the Apple MacBook and things like that. There are so many images that actually pop up when I kind of like think as Apple. But when I think as a Oppo or Vivo, I didn't really see anything at all. Yeah, I might kind of like imagine their latest phone, but probably nothing really at all. Like basically what exactly is this thing? People holds the value of what they kind of like offer. Okay, yeah. And if you're not offering any kind of like a value, then probably people don't really care that all. Okay, yeah. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that you should supposed to be tell your story, where you are, where you've been through and everything. Because it's really essential that in the future that who you are and what you are, then people kind of like understand. The people started believing that yes, you are kind of like been through very horrible situation, and right now because of kind of like somebody you are kind of like somebody filtered out by kind of like somebody all the kind of like somebody non good thing, and right now you are kind of like bitterly pure, and people kind of like respect you. People are kind of like started buy you or kind of like somebody buy product from you or kind of like somebody buy the services from you is because of you are putting a lot of efforts and things like that. Now basically I'm not saying that kind of like a Vivo and Oppo didn't really put that much effort. No, they did put a lot of effort, but as compared to the effort that Apple put and as compared to the kind of like a Vivo and X100 put, Vivo and Oppo put is kind of like a bit more less. Obviously 100 out of kind of like a 90% would kind of like understand what is actually Apple. They knows Apple, they understand what is actually Apple and things like that, what is actually brand company. But maybe 100 out of maybe 40 or 30 people might gonna understand who is exactly Vivo and who is exactly Vivo and things like that. And if I'm gonna say that would you buy kind of like a 1 lakh rupees phone, then most of people choose to be a Samsung and Apple. They would not gonna choose any kind of like a Vivo and things like that, because Apple and Samsung, they are kind of like somebody creates his reputation from decade, and they are kind of like a creates his brand in itself. Okay, yeah. So that's why kind of like Apple didn't really have to kind of like push them more further to kind of like somebody create the phone. Their mobile phone is a bit more smarter, but more kind of like a better and things like that. By the way, let me tell you one thing is this thing that I'm not saying that Apple camera is not really good at that, but kind of like a somewhat something is the Vivo camera is kind of like a somebody 100 out of maybe kind of like 100, then Apple camera might be kind of like 100 out of 95. Okay, yeah. So this is what it is. Okay, but still it's kind of like somebody hold its value and things like that. What I'm trying to tell you is this thing that it's if everyone gets kind of like a funding regarding about money, regarding about their ideas and things like that, then probably people will kind of like confused. People will not gonna understand. Let me give you context. Okay, yeah. Small thing always holds value. Like basically when you like basically how do I supposed to explain? Like basically this is kind of like something my mother taught me. Okay, yeah. Small thing always better. Like a basically having less you get more. Okay, yeah. When you have less you actually get more, and this is what something kind of like somebody exists in every possible scenario. Okay, let me give you perspective. Okay, yeah. Now imagine that you are very hungry. You wanted to eat something. Okay, yeah. And right now you have almost like a maybe 101 rupees. okay, in your bank account, 101 rupees. Now you went to the hotel and there is a kind of like assembly one plate of thali which exactly like 100 rupees, exactly like 100 rupees. Okay, yeah. Now you kind of like spend 100 rupees to buy that thali. Okay, yeah, you actually get that food and things like that. You actually consider yourself that value of the 100 rupees is kind of like a bit more better than kind of like having millions of amount of money in your bank account. What I'm trying to tell you is this thing: when you put the effort for money and when you spend that money, the value of that money is kind of like a felt really good. Like basically is this thing: if you have kind of like a millions amount of money, you will not get that much kind of like assembly. You will not gonna focus that much. Like basically, even if you lost, like if you have million amount of money and you just lost maybe 100 200 rupees, you might not consider that thing. You just consider that just fuck off that. You don't really take care of that. Okay, 100 200 rupees, that's is gone. Okay, yeah. But when you are earning almost like thousands of rupees, only 1,000 rupees, then probably for 100 rupees is kind of like a something bit more value than you. Now regarding about the scenario that I mentioned, that when you have less you get more, what exactly it means? It means that na ki basically is this thing: you are kind of like a somebody getting more when you have less. Now how do I supposed to get more? Like basically if I have very less amount of money, how do I supposed to get more thing? Now get more thing means what? Get more physical thing not, or get more kind of like a service is not, get more value. Okay, yeah. Now what exactly value means? What example is this thing: a kind of like a rich person might not sleep during the night because he always has stress and things like that, because the entire rest of the day he was kind of like not doing any kind of like a work, because he has a lot of amount of money and things, and he doesn't really have to put kind of like a effort or kind of like a earn money or things like that. Why? Because he already has so much amount of money, right? Yeah. But a person who doesn't really have so much amount of money, he can kind of like go to the job and kind of like do a job for almost like 8 hours or 10 hours. He came home, he eat food, and when he went to the sleep, he sleep very peacefully. So who is actually getting sleep very peacefully? A poor person actually getting sleep very peacefully as compared to the rich person. Even if the rich person has a kind of like a better mattresses, air condition or things or that, but still he will not kind of like sleep that much peacefully. And this is what kind of like somebody is this thing: the getting means not getting a kind of like only money or service or things like that. Getting means kind of like somebody happiness, or getting means kind of like somebody a better sleep, or getting means kind of like somebody feel more peaceful, or kind of like somebody better. That is called kind of like a having less is getting more. This is what kind of like my mother taught me, and when I try to understand that factor, it kind of like feel really good. Let me also give you another example why how does my mother kind of like taught me this thing. Okay, yeah. So basically this thing, my mother kind of like assembly, I like to eat god puri. Okay, yeah. If you don't really understand what exactly god puri is a kind of like assembly Maharashtrian cuisine, by the way. It's a kind of like assembly roti with shakkar, with sugar. Okay, yeah. So basically you just kind of like assembly put the sugar in the roti and kind of like assembly make the kind of like assembly god puri. Okay, yeah. Now I like the god puri, I love to eat the god puri. Okay, yeah. And basically this thing, I love to eat that god puri. Okay, yeah. So I kind of like ate one god puri. My mother kind of like make that god puri, and I ate that thing. Okay, yeah. And I want another thing. I kind of like went to mother, says that I मला अजून एक गोड पोळी हवी आहे. आई म्हणाली नको, नाही एकच गोड पोळी खा. ओके, आई मी का नाही खाऊ, लाईक बेसिकली वाय आय नॉट ईट अनदर गोड पोळी. माय मदर सेज दॅट की एकच खा, तुला चांगलं वाटेल. छोटी गोष्ट नेहमी चांगलीच लागते. म्हणजे माझी आई म्हणायची की छोटी गोष्ट नेहमी चांगलीच असते. नो बेसिकली इज दिस थिंग दॅट की छोटी गोष्ट नेहमी चांगलीच असते मीन्स वॉट, लाईक बेसिकली स्मॉल थिंग्स आर ऑलवेज बेटर. आय ट्राय टू अंडरस्टँड दॅट थिंग अँड इट काइंड ऑफ लाईक अ क्लिक मी. दिस इज काइंड ऑफ लाईक रियल वर्ल्ड दॅट वी आर बीन थ्रू. Okay, yeah. Like basically every small thing that you are getting is kind of like somewhat something is kind of like a matter to them. Example, okay, yeah. If you have kind of like an opportunity to go to the kind of like a talk to the Mr. Beast and kind of like a said to the Mr. Beast, okay, yeah, and kind of like a talk to him that key which kind of like somebody computer that you are using kind of like holding its own value, holding its kind of like a too much value in your career and craft and things like that. Probably the Mr. Beast might gonna say that kind of like a cringy old computer that he was kind of like using at early days. He was kind of like doing a YouTube. His computer is kind of like a really not that good, but still he kind of like make a video and kind of like do that thing. What I'm trying to tell you is this thing, for the Mr. Beast, he kind of like hold the value for kind of like somebody for his old computer that he was kind of like somebody making video. Okay, yeah. And that's what kind of like things that people are kind of like most really associate with the kind of like stuff that matter to them in the kind of like a most vulnerable situation. And this is where it kind of like came through. Small thing always kind of like somebody much better and things like that. So this is what kind of like a things like basically is this thing, when we have a small thing, we always kind of like consider them a kind of like a best in that class. Example is this thing, if you're gonna say social media, probably we are kind of like imagine as a Facebook or kind of like somebody Instagram. If you are kind of like decided to watch a video, we actually focus on YouTube. Okay, yeah. If you are kind of like apply a job, we have to focus on LinkedIn. Okay, yeah. If you wanted to order a food, we should supposed to focus on Zomato or Swiggy. If you wanted to kind of like buy any kind of like online product, Amazon or Flipkart. Okay, yeah. Now these are kind of like some of the services that they are offering, which kind of like hold it creates value in itself. By the way, I'm not saying is that these are kind of like there are multiples of applications who are kind of like providing the same services, but still I remember only those services. Why? Because it's popular, it's better, and it's really good at they are doing. Okay, yeah. And that is kind of like hold its value. If everyone is kind of like earning so much, if everyone kind of like getting so much funding in their kind of like every business idea and things like that, then it create chaos. Everyone kind of like doing the same thing, doing kind of like providing the same thing, and no one kind of like holds its own value and things like that. And people might be kind of like scared. People might not get the kind of like value that they want, and this might be kind of like a really fucked up thing happen. Okay, yeah. Now another thing is that I'm not saying is that thing that you shouldn't supposed to be provide a kind of like a funding to the company. No, definitely you should supposed to be provide a funding, but you should supposed to provide a funding to such a thing that kind of like something it value, it hold, it kind of like add provide to the society or things like that. Okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing, every kind of like some business ideas get actually funding, it's not actually good, because if this thing actually happened, then probably there are more CEOs than kind of like some people who are kind of like doing a carpenter, doing a kind of like a driver, doing a kind of like somebody the effort or employee. Like there are more CEOs than employees, and probably is this thing, when there are more CEOs than employees, then probably the having the value of the CEO is kind of like far less than employee. So basically this is at that time the value of the employee is actually far more better than CEOs. Okay, yeah. We might have to kind of like simply give kind of like a hefty salary to the employee, so that they would supposed to be sustained. If they not, then probably they would kind of like switch to someone else company, and probably you will kind of like lose the talent and things like that. Okay, yeah. Another thing is that now if the everyone kind of if the every idea is actually get the funding and things like that, then probably every idea is kind of like somebody holding on resources and things like that. Then they are kind of like somebody want their resources, and like they want steel or any kind of like somebody material or things and that and that. Okay, yeah. Now basically if everyone wants that, everyone wants the material and kind of like a product and things and that, then probably what will happen that people are kind of like buying those kind of like material, which kind of like creates the scarcism, which kind of like create a kind of like a little less availability. When there is a little less availability of the product, then probably it kind of like a boost up the prices, and if there is a boost up the prices, the inflation will gonna happen. If the inflation will gonna happen, the economic will gonna shut down and things like that. Okay, yeah. Well, this is not gonna happen just instantly. No, it takes time. It takes kind of like so much amount of time to do this thing, but it actually happened. Okay, another thing is that it's very difficult to understand which kind of like some idea went to failure, which idea went to success. Okay, yeah. Because if the kind of like every idea is actually getting funded by the money and things like that, then probably this thing 10 out of 2 might be kind of like a get success, and 10 out of 8 might get failure. So the people who actually invested money on their business idea, they might kind of like face the failure, and it will kind of like create a chaos in them too, because in the end they want money too. And the people who are like a CEOs and things like that, they are promised to kind of like deliver the money, they won't be able to deliver the money. So basically they are taking loans, and if they are taking loans and they are kind of like defaulting loans, then basically banks will kind of like pay them on behalf. And another thing, the bank would kind of like pay them on the behalf. If the money loan is kind of like too much, then probably bank will kind of like somebody withdraw them. Bank will kind of like somebody seize the things and that, and probably is this thing that all the kind of like somebody financial thing, like financial destruction will gonna happen. Okay, yeah. Because let me tell you one thing, money is not the kind of like somebody providing the value, is the people who actually providing the value. Okay, yeah. We need to find the right people to kind of like provide the value to the society, to the better world, to the better thing. Okay, yeah. So it's really essential to understand that why am I talking really fast? Why am I talking really fast? Talk slow. Okay. I'm just talking really fast. Okay, just talk slow, dude. Just talk slow. Okay, just talk slow. I'm hurting my jaws. it's like talking like talk slow. Okay, yeah. Okay. Um. So basically, is this thing that he, it's not really good to kind of like somebody provide the money to fund to the every business idea, because in the end it's not really good. Okay, because the business idea meant to be kind of like simply providing the value to the society. A business idea meant to be kind of like creating value in its own. If the business idea is actually failed to do that thing, then probably as a kind of like a chairman lost their kind of like a simply money, but as well as investor lost their money too, as well as kind of like people lost their hopes, and kind of like a simply all the chain reaction will gonna happen to kind of like a simply create a destruction and things like that. So it is really essential to understand that as an investor, or as a kind of like a somebody the chairman, or as a kind of like a CEO. Okay, yeah, if you are a CEO, make sure that you have to provide such a value that it matter to the society. One thing. Another thing is that you have to believe that fact that you have to do this thing, because in the end you have to be kind of like a went through very horrible situation, and you have to be focused on kind of like a solely make your product, make your services as much as better it can, when no one believes that thing, and it's very difficult to do that thing. Another thing. Okay, yeah, being an investor, you have to be understand that key, is this kind of like a somebody offering a kind of like a perfect value to the society? If they're not, then don't invest. Okay, yeah. And also another thing is that if everyone are kind of like somebody getting money, then probably people are might gonna started utilizing this advantage for wrong reason. Okay, yeah, like some people are kind of like a making weapon, or kind of like a things which kind of like a somebody create a chaos in the society too. Also is not really good thing too. So basically, is this thing, a human mind is kind of like a bit more fragile. It always meant to be grow, but you have to be understand that grow comes from kind of like for the good purposes, not for the bad purposes. Oh, sorry, grows. Yeah. Like basically the growth are kind of like utilized for good purposes, not for the bad purposes. So this is what I'm talking what I kind of like explain this and that, this is that and that. All right. So this is it. I should supposed to be end here. And thank you.